Hey, welcome to my January wrap up being posted super late because I have had COVID for the last 2 weeks. Will this be a series of coherent reviews? Will I tell you about the 12 books I read in January? Yes, absolutely. So if you're interested in any book in particular, as always, the timestamps are in the description, but otherwise, I'll just walk you through my January reading journey of 12 books. There were ups, there were downs, and we started with a down. Because I started with Still Life by Louise. So Still Life is the first in a series of detective novels following Detective Armand Gamache. It is set in small town Quebec, like outside of the city, and is kind of like a cozy small town mystery. In this one, someone is murdered because it's a murder mystery. COVID brain strikes again. This one, someone is murdered, and it is an elderly woman who has been known to be a reclusive painter and never show her art to anybody. She also doesn't let people into her home beyond like one of the rooms. She keeps the rest of her home secret. But 2 days before she's murdered, she submits this like painting to the local art competition or whatever, and people see her art for the first time and it's terrible. Like they're shocked by how terrible it is. But the painting represents an event where the whole town was there. It was like it's like a harvest festival or something like that. The whole town's there and people can kind of recognize each other and recognize, you know, find themselves in the painting kind of thing. And then she is mysteriously shot through the heart with a hunting arrow. And then turns out there's a bunch of hunters in this town. So this inspector from Montreal comes to investigate. Let's see which of the hunters shot her through the heart and the arrow. What was their motive? Blah, blah. I gave this book 1 star. The reason I gave this book 1 star is because it stopped making sense. It's one of those books that's like objectively you're like, yeah, this is fine, this is fine, this is fine. But the moment you start to think about it, like even a little, it doesn't make sense anymore. And there's just all these like very glaring logical flaws and inconsistencies. So for example, the main detective gets suspended, like his gun and his badge get revoked, and then he just goes back to the town and keeps investigating. Like for a week they're like, you're suspended. He's like, okay. And then he goes to the victim's funeral and still like interviews people and stuff, and no one's like, that is a problem, sir, that is a violation. He's never reinstated, unless I like missed that page. He's never overtly reinstated. We just pretend the suspension never happened. And then when you get to the end, it's like the mystery is revealed. You find out who killed this woman, you find out what's inside her house, you find out why the painting was significant, blah blah blah. But the book literally spends several pages telling you that yes, someone would definitely kill someone else over this. This is a totally logical way to solve a murder mystery. This is absolutely logical. Nothing to see here. Yes, the story makes sense. Like, we are beaten over the head with it because it does not make sense. This book felt way longer than it was. It's only like 300 pages. It felt like 600 pages. It was a slog to get through. I absolutely do not recommend this. If you're like into thrillers, cozy mysteries, no. There was nothing I enjoyed about this experience. And just as a fun bonus, there's mistakes in the French. They're misspelled and blatantly incorrect. Like no editor caught that. There's just it reads like a draft. Okay, I need to stop complaining about this book. This video is getting too long just from me complaining about this book. But this was the first book I read in 2023, and I was really disappointed. I was really disappointed that this was the first book that I finished in 2023. So at the beginning of 2023, I was sick, not with COVID. I had bacterial conjunctivitis in both my eyes, a sinus infection, some throat stuff, and just general body being attacked with stuff. It has been a bad 2 months. Like, honestly, it's been a bad 2 months. I've just been sick, like, continuously. So that has meant a lot of audiobooks, because when I had my bacterial infection in both my eyes, I could not see for a few days. So the second book that I finished in January was the audiobook of The Myth of Normal by Gabor and Maté. And I have really enjoyed Gabor Mate's work. I think he's risen to popularity. He's now like practically a pop psychologist. So if you don't know anything about Gabor Maté, he is a doctor living in British Columbia in Canada, and he is a very big advocate for trauma as a determinant of health. He has developed a lot of like trauma-based practices and has been responsible for um, like in part responsible for pioneering safe injection sites for drug users in Vancouver, for example. And he works a lot with traumatized people. He himself is a Hungarian Jew and a survivor of concentration camps. Like he was a child, like an infant, and he was separated from his mother when he was very young and talks about this quite a lot. So because he's a medical doctor, he has quite a few interesting things to say, and because he works with clients and especially Indigenous clients in Canada who have suffered intergenerational and like systemic abuse, and he looks at like their health consequences and stuff. So very interesting figure. And then his son Daniel, I don't remember if he does like advocacy, if he's also a doctor. I'm honestly not too sure. He usually narrates the audiobooks. And has been involved a lot in Gabor's work. So The Myth of Normal is basically Gabor's like magnum opus. It is honestly a collection of some of his past books. I've read In the Realm of the Hungry Ghost, which is a book on addiction and trauma, and I've also read Go Good Brain, When the Body Says No, which is about the toll that stress and repressing stress can take on our health and can take on our health, basically. So he rehashes a lot of the ideas here, and he rehashes them in this really big context. So this book spans everything. So the authors touch on intersectionality, alienation, abject dismissal of alternate points of view, polarization, trauma relativism, a bunch of other stuff that makes the book feel like really, really grounded. It's really an intro, like the book is almost a time capsule of our cultural experience with COVID-19, the current housing crisis in Canada, the political theater we've been subjected to over the past decade or so, the billionaire oligarchy that's clearly rising, our search for meaning in this world, the rise of things like wellness influencers and ayahuasca tourism, and the obvious cracks in our medical systems. And I really appreciate how much he talks about the Canadian medical system specifically. That is absolutely cracking at its seams. It's the problem. The book tackles these issues from so many perspectives. Like we're talking from telomeres, like the caps on chromosomes, to Trump. We're talking naloxone, the life-saving drug that can reverse an opioid overdose, to Nazis. It's all there. My biggest gripe with the book is actually with the title. I really didn't feel like the book was trying to say, none of us are normal. There's no such thing as a normal person because we're under all this pressure. So I feel like the central tenet was that we can all be healed. Like there's all these terrible things in the world. The book really discusses like bleakness and having to face that bleakness and accepting that bleakness. And the central tenet really becomes, okay, well, like the world is bleak and we all suffer, but that doesn't mean that things are hopeless. I feel like this is one of those books that you don't need to agree with everything that's said in it to still really enjoy it, to still really find it thought-provoking. There were plenty of passages that I was skeptical about, and I think healthy skepticism is useful, but they still prompted a lot of reflection and a lot of very interesting conversations. And I had a lot of time to reflect because my eyes weren't working while I was listening to this book. So yeah, this was a 5-star. I really recommend it if you're into like social determinants of health, health psychology, sociology, trauma books, nonfiction. It's absolutely fantastic. If you've read one of his previous books, you will recognize them here and hopefully enjoy them. I love that this book, the author literally says, this is not meant to be a profound book. This just like enjoy it like a pop song. And I did. And that's the Kaiju Preservation Society. This book is so funny. I don't want to really tell you too much about what it's about because we're following a narrator who doesn't know what he's getting himself into. He is working for a food delivery service a la Uber Eats and gets fired. And it's the very beginning of the pandemic. So this is a very strong pandemic novel. We are in the spring of 2020. This man just got fired from his job. He was the only one bringing in an income, and things are dire. However, he has been offered a new job to work in the preservation of large animals. This job involves field work. He would be gone 8 months of the year, and then 4 months of the year he's off, and it comes with a very, very big paycheck. He's very interested in this job. The job was with KPS, the Kaiju Preservation Society. If you, like me, don't know what a kaiju is, it's basically Godzilla. It's the class of animals that Godzilla belongs to. This book is just so refreshing and funny. Like, it really feels like a little, like, comedy movie. It's kind of predictable. Like, you sort of know what's happening. There's a lot of, like, setups of, like, oh, you know that this character is the villain and he will return later and our main character will overcome. And, you know, for everything. But it's so enjoyable. I think the writing is so nice and the descriptions are really interesting and really present. It was just very easy to envision. This book is basically just like, what if Jurassic Park happened during COVID, but in an alternate dimension? Okay, that's the last spoiler I'm gonna give. They're in an alternate dimension when they go to preserve the kaijus. And the walls between the dimensions are falling apart, which is really fun. What I really enjoyed, that was like extra fun, is that the main character, I think like wrote a master's about sci-fi, which is like why he was recruited, but everyone around him has a PhD, and he's like really weirded out by it. He's like, wait, you're a doctor? You're also a doctor? You're also a doctor? Like literally everyone has a PhD. And like in an academic environment, like I'm kind of used to that, but I realize that most people are not. And what's really funny is that all the PhD holders are like, yeah, I might have a PhD, but like I'm kind of dumb and I like to party. Which, in my experience, is true of a lot of PhD holders. We're just like you. We're actually probably worse. It reminded me a lot of grad school, actually, just reading about how all these different scientists interact with each other and get like super excited about data. And like, even when bad stuff happens, they're like, oh, but it's so cool. And that is basically the experience working in science. So I found this book really just refreshing, but familiar and lots of fun. So I really recommend it, even if you're not into sci-fi. I'm not really into like Godzillas, but I just really enjoyed the experience of reading this book. Great stuff. So then I finished another audiobook, and this one wrecked me. This book wrecked me absolutely. I think I finished this in 24 hours, and then I just sort of needed to sit there. And that book was Nightcrawling. So this book is based on an actual scandal that happened in Oakland where young women who were sex workers were being trafficked in part by the police force instead of, being protected and helped, because largely these were women who were in desperate economic need and often and occasionally also underage. So we follow our main character, who is 17, and she lives just with her older brother, who thinks he's gonna make it big in the rap world, and basically refuses to work. And so she needs to figure out how to get money for rent. And she's also been taking care of their neighbor, who's this little boy. He's like 10, very sweet, very cute, and his mom has just disappeared, so she's also been paying their rent. So she's just kind of desperate for money. And she goes trying to find work and literally falls into sex work basically by accident. And then she realizes, well, it's money. I guess it's money. And she just suffers and suffers and is continuously re-traumatized. And it's such a harrowing book to read, because then she gets involved in the scandal breaking that the police force is trafficking her and other women, and she is asked to testify. Given that she's testifying against the police, she's then intimidated by the police. This book explores so much violence, specifically like violence against a young Black girl in the US. It is so dark, and it's dark in this way that like you can't ignore it, like you can't look away, because you are rooting for this character and you really want her to be okay and you really want to be protective of her, but you also can feel the like desperation and how stuck she is and how much the system is set up against her. This was a really difficult book to read, honestly. Really painful to read. I did end up giving it 5 stars because I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop reading it. I just like needed to know what was going to happen, and it left me absolutely destroyed. So if you are looking to be emotionally destroyed and devastated and can handle reading about honestly very graphic and horrific things happening to young women, then I really recommend this. While it is fiction, it's a fictionalization of real events, so it's very grounded in reality. It really exposes some of the ways that these women are just prevented from escaping this life. It's really sad. It's really, really, really sad, and it's an amazing book, and it now lives rent-free in my head, like forever. After that, I finished the collection of Junji Ito comics about Tomie. It's a collection of short stories, like maybe like a dozen, maybe a bit more, and they all feature this villain monster called Tomie, who always takes the form of a teenage girl, and she haunts the main character. And the main characters are sometimes teenage girls themselves, sometimes they're older women, sometimes they're men, younger men, and she just haunts everybody. And the thing is, she is unkillable. And this becomes a central doctrine. She is extremely enchanting. People fawn over her. They absolutely adore her, almost worship her. And then she manipulates them into doing some terrible things. And now and again, when people try to get rid of her, you cannot get rid of her. The whole point of Tomie is that she is unescapable. So these were fun. I wouldn't really recommend them as like an entry point to Junji Ito because they get very repetitive. So it really does start to feel like he has one shtick and it's just the Tomie. But it's really just the fact that all these stories are collected together. They were published separately in like different literary magazines, journals, manga things. They were not published together originally. This is a collection. So while it is repetitive, it is a really enjoyable read. I would not recommend it as your first foray into horror manga, simply because Junji Ito has more diverse collections that would probably be way more interesting if you're trying to get into him. But if you do enjoy Junji Ito's storytelling, if you've seen some of the Netflix stuff, which I haven't yet, but I'm really looking forward to, I would recommend picking this up. Like, it is good fun. It's good horror fun. Okay, so I'm working on this little project that I think is going to come out next week. I think. And that's reading the entire You series by Carolyn Kepnes. So I read the first book a while back, and in January I finished the second and third book, and right now I'm wrapping up the advanced reader's copy that I have for the fourth book. And I will give a very long video. There's a very long vlog coming up with all my spoiler-filled thoughts and reactions to this whole series. So I will not give a spoilery review now of Hidden Bodies, which is the second book in the You series. If you're unfamiliar with the You series, what this is about is we are in the head of Joe Goldberg. Joe Goldberg is a stalker narcissistic psychopath who thinks he is a good person. Joe Goldberg likes to kill people. He doesn't like to kill people. He just thinks that that is an appropriate way to solve some of his problems. So you may or may not have seen the series on Netflix. And the series on Netflix, basically one season is one book. So there have been 3 seasons. The 4th one recently launched. The first 3 seasons kind of follow the first 3 books. I say kind of because the first book matches onto the season, but then the second book goes completely off the rails. So Hidden Bodies, totally different setup. So this whole book made me think that I didn't see the second season of the TV show, and that's not the case. I absolutely did, and I did actually remember what happened in it. But the book, just the plot deviates so much. It's kind of like an alternate universe. So in both the book and season 2, Joe gets over murdering his girlfriend from book 1, Guinevere Beck, and decides to become obsessed with another woman, Amy Adam. And then when she cons him and flees from him from New York to LA, he decides to go to LA to find her and exact revenge because this man is an obsessive weirdo. So he moves to LA, and in his search for the elusive Amy Adam, he meets Love Quinn. Love Quinn and her brother 40 Quinn are working on movies together. They are trying to produce independent movies, make it big in Hollywood. And Joe becomes involved with them. What happens next will blow your mind. What happens next is just funny. Like, honestly, these books are just good fun and hilarious, and I do recommend it. If you enjoyed the show, I think you will really enjoy reading the books because it almost feels like you're reading fan fiction of the show. But it's like not terrible. It almost feels like you're reading an alternate universe. The plot changes so much. It literally, like, the characters are different. In the show, I think Love Quinn is like a culinary student or like a cook. That doesn't happen at all in the book. In the book, she's really, really rich and producing movies, and all these things happen. There's all these details and all these people who were murdered by our narcissistic narrator, Joe Goldberg, that just don't happen. It doesn't happen in the TV show. So if you want to know more about what actually does happen, stay tuned for the upcoming video. I'm just going to transition right into talking about You Love Me, which is the third book, which goes even more off the rails. Season 3 and this book, like, are in different universes. I think season 3 was still based in California. This book, no. We go to a small remote island off the coast of Seattle. It's sleepy, it's quiet. Joe falls in love with a librarian who has a teenage daughter and an absentee husband. But he decides to be good this time. He decides to do it well. He decides to not murder anyone. He does other things, but he tries very hard not to murder anyone in this book. Entertainment abounds. I really enjoyed this. I've given both books 2 and 3 4 stars because they are just so comical. I think what was really funny in this town is because it's such a small town where, like, no one usually gets murdered because there are like 1,000 people in it. Joe really needs to start coming up with good alibis when bodies drop around him. It's people he didn't kill, but he didn't not kill them. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, reading vlog coming out in about a week. By the end of February, I promise. I just need to finish reading the 4th book. But I'm really enjoying the series. I then read a short story collection called White Cat, Black Dog. And this I have as an advanced reader copy. I think the short story collection is coming out sometime in the spring. And it is mostly fairy tale retellings. But it's retellings of fairy tales that I wasn't super familiar with, and also, like, really, not only was I not familiar with the fairy tales presented, but they were also retold with such sort of like modernity and flair that I found it like a really interesting change. So I really liked the first story, which features the white cat, and I really liked the last story that features a black dog. Like, the last story that features a black dog is like a 6 out of 5 stars. Like, it's art. It is absolute art. However, the middle stories I found kind of forgettable. To be honest, I would basically just read them as my bedtime stories because I would get kind of sleepy while I was reading them because nothing was really gripping me. I think this is also just, I'm not a huge fairy tale person. I'm not a huge fairy tale retelling person, but I want to be. I like myths and legends in general, and I really like it when it's executed well. So what was really fun with the last story that I loved was that it was very creepy. There was a creep factor that just persisted, and just the atmosphere was amazing. It was so well crafted, it was so interesting, and it ended way too soon. I would read a whole book very happily based on that last story. So for that alone, I would recommend it. I would recommend the short story collection. But in particular, if you're into fairy tales, if you're into fairy tale retellings, and if you're into like a little bit of modern weird writing that's like a tiny bit creepy and hinting at some stuff and you don't quite know what's going on, I would really recommend this collection. Like I said, it's coming out in the spring, and yeah, it still got 4 stars from me, even though the middle stories felt a little fillery. I did enjoy reading them. Like, they were my bedtime stories, and I did fall asleep while reading them a couple of times, but I still enjoyed that experience because the writing itself was very, very good. So I do recommend this. And then I read another short story collection, which honestly just I had such luck with the short story collection. It's Friday Black. This is a collection that is very reminiscent of the like genre popularized by Black Mirror, that we take something that already sort of exists in society and we take it to a slight extreme to illustrate how messed up it is. So 2 of the stories are set on Black Friday and deal with retail workers having to see some terrible things during Black Friday. So all the stories are written from first person perspective and all the narrators are Black, and race becomes very important in the stories because they explore a lot of racial relations in the US. One of the most striking stories focuses on a theme park experience where you can pay to act out a violent fantasy. So we follow one of the actors in this theme park. Actors, it was just a young Black man, and his whole scene is he's like hanging outside of a house, and the client gets to come out of the house and shoot him as a defense, like a self-defense thing, even though the actor, the young guy, isn't doing anything. And he's just like chilling in his bulletproof vest, and his job is getting shot by older, angry white guys who want to protect their house from a threat that doesn't exist. Um, it is very jarring and it is very sad to read like the internal monologue of this guy who's basically just like, I need this job. I need some kind of job, and like, yeah, it's messed up that people want to pay to shoot me or simulate shooting me, but I guess this is what I do now. Pays the bills. And a lot of the stories really sort of talk about that, like the loss of dignity that a lot of people who are working minimum wage jobs or like degrading jobs basically, there's a lot of reflection on like late stage capitalism, losing your humanity to a degrading job, how race plays into that. And I absolutely devour these stories. I really, really recommend them. They're so fresh and so different from anything that I've read before. It's really good speculative fiction, and I don't remember where I got this recommendation, but I'm so glad I did, and I am giving it to you. Read these. You gotta read these. They contain unflinching violence, righteous anger, and are just bursting with creativity. I recommend this collection so widely, but especially if you want perspectives of the terrors of growing up Black in America, the horrors of late stage capitalistic hellscapes, and find stories that deal with loops like time loops, suffering loops, routine loops interesting. There were some really cool concepts explored, and this was like a recurring theme I noticed. I was very impressed. I was so impressed. Please read this. It's very good. I was in a really bleak mood by the end of the month, I think, because I picked up The Disaster Tourist, which doesn't have that high of a rating on Goodreads, but I found it very, very good. So I understand why people don't like this book, but I think it really delivers on a very disturbing concept. So in this book, we follow a young woman who's been working for a tourism company for a decade and gets harassed by her boss, like very overtly sexually harassed by her boss. So when she gives in her resignation, the boss says instead, well, how about you go on one of our tour packages? We send you on it. And as a free vacation, clear your mind, enjoy it, see if we should still offer it. And then one, tell us if it's still good. And two, if you still want to quit your job after, all good. But I want to offer you this vacation. Go do your thing. I'm just like, all right, why not? But the tourism company only does what's called disaster tourism. So people can book vacations to places like war zones, natural disaster sites, active volcanoes, like horrible places, like horrible places. So already we have this like voyeuristic tourist gaze stuff going on and all this commentary. So she ends up in this little tour group of 5 or 6 people on this remote island that had a sinkhole about like 50 years ago, and now there's like not much to see basically other than the people of this island living in abject poverty. And the people on this island really like the tourists, like the very much are like, please buy our little like crafts. Like all the children run up to the tourists to get them to buy like it's not seashell necklaces, but that's sort of the vibe, if you get what I mean. So it really already explores the like, you are a rich person suddenly coming into this poor community like for fun and getting the like local experience, and there's a lot of that happening. But then things get weird. Then things get really, really weird. And this is the part of the book that it's like very clearly experimental and very clearly, it just gets stressful. This book gets very uncomfortable and very stressful to read very quickly. So our main character is separated from her tour group and effectively becomes stranded on this island with no money, no passport, and no one to help her. And because she ends up in places she's not supposed to be, she ends up seeing things that she's not supposed to see. And there are conspiracies uncovered. There are very troubling truths to be met with. There are these very bizarre scenes of people getting intentionally run over, like if that gives you a flavor of what this is. So this book is filled with upsetting moments and sympathetic bureaucracy and like this really interesting portrayal of the tourist gaze. But this latter really unfolds into horror, and you can kind of feel it coming. Like it's really brewing and you sort of see what's going to happen, but it's still unpredictable. And I couldn't look away, but it was like scary. So I do recommend it if you like satire, but don't mind your satire going too far, because this one does go too far. If you enjoy reading about the evils of disembodied greed, because who doesn't? And if you're looking for some short translated Korean fiction, yeah, this was a 4-star read for me. I really loved it. A graphic novel that I finished in January was Paper Planes, and this was another advanced reader copy that I got. It comes out in the spring, and it's like a young adult coming of age little drama, basically. So we follow these 2 characters who are sent to some kind of like behavioral rehabilitation camp over an incident. It is very unclear what the incident is. We don't get that information until much later in the book, but we learn a lot about the relationship between these 2 characters. So the characters are struggling with class, race, sexuality, gender identity, gender expression, and all these things have come together and created a difficult situation in their lives, but also cemented a friendship between them that has existed for several years. So we get to know the characters through basically their experiences at the summer camp. It is the summer between middle school and high school for them. So they're quite young. We get to experience them at that time of their lives, and then in flashbacks starting around the 4th or 5th grade. And we see basically their trajectory of what brought them to summer camp, what the incident was, and what the relationship between them is like. If you're looking for a gentle graphic novel about finding yourself as a young teenager, if you want some non-binary and ace representation, and if you don't mind a rush story, then this will probably be the graphic novel for you. The art is really beautiful, and I did enjoy it. This was like a 3.5 star for me. I started the month with a terrible thriller, but I ended the month with a great thriller, and that was Penance. This is a Japanese thriller, and I love translated fiction so much, and I love poetic justice, and I love horrible, bizarre misunderstandings that echo through time. And I love when characters are so traumatized that they reenact their trauma like 10 or 15 years later. Cough, cough, Listener Season 1. So Penance follows 4 girls who witness the abduction and off-screen assault and murder of their friend when they were all children. So 5 little girls play together, 1 little girl gets taken away, killed, and then the remaining 4 little girls go on with their lives. And the book opens up by telling you that Japan has a 15-year statute of limitations on murder. And this becomes kind of important because we're following the girls for those 15 years after. So the 4 girls who were alive took very different paths. One of them went to stay with the body. One of them went to inform the parents of the little girl. One of them went to the police. And one of them went to find a teacher or someone else who can help. And then we find out what the rest of their lives were like and how this trauma impacted them. And we find this out through first-person account letters, girl by girl, and the letters are written to the mother of the little murdered girl. And the mother of the little murdered girl called the rest of the girls, like all the 4 of them, she referred to them as murderers because she was so upset that they didn't prevent the death of her daughter. And she gives them an ultimatum that they either need to repent and offer penance for what they did before the statute of limitations is up, or they need to find the murderer before the 15-year statute of limitations is up. Because of course no one ever gets caught for these murders. This was just a really good thriller. I really enjoyed it. Like, we go character by character. There's no sort of interwoven narrative, so you get the full letter of girl 1, then the full letter of girl 2, then the full letter of girl 3, and you get to sort of piece together elements of the story as you go. I really recommend it if you're into dark fiction, if you're into translated fiction, if you don't like character studies of very broken people who lash out, and also just if you're looking for a well-written thriller. Read this. It's great. It's great. The author has another thriller that I can't wait to read because this was just so satisfying and so good and felt quite original and fresh. And that was my January wrap-up. Belated? Yes. As we've been doing since 2020, I am blaming it on COVID. COVID was absolutely awful. I don't recommend it. It was my first time being sick with it, and it was just a terrible experience. So stay healthy, stay safe, have a great rest of your day, and I hope you read a really good book soon. Okay, bye.